Welcome to the Dip Dive. Today, we're jumping into something really fascinating and definitely complex. India's big ambitions and the constantly shifting ground of South Asian geopolitics. We're going to unpack a recent article from Foreign Affairs called India's Great Power Delusions: How New Delhi's Grand Strategy Thwarts Its Grand Ambitions. Basically, our mission here is to get grips with two pretty significant ideas, Akhand Bharat and Greater India. We want to see how they're actually playing out in India's relationships with its neighbors, especially, with China becoming such a big player there. And of course, where does the US fit into all this? It's a real puzzle, so let's get into it.
It's absolutely a critical topic if you're watching global power dynamics.
Hmm.
India, I mean, it's the most populous country now, historically the powerhouse in South Asia, so it's always had a lot of influence. But this foreign affairs piece makes a really interesting point. It argues that even with India's economic success, its grand strategy, especially embracing Hindu nationalism and this desire for a multipolar world, might actually be getting in the way of its own global goals. It suggests, that even looking ahead to 2047, India might still need partners, strong foreign partners, to really balance out China's power. And its reluctance, its real discomfort with formal alliances could make getting that support tricky. So it really makes you ask, how do India's internal politics and its, let's be honest, often difficult relations with its neighbors actually shape its rise on the world stage?
That's a great way to frame it. And speaking of those internal dynamics and neighborly relations, let's start with something recent that really hit the headlines. You probably saw the news about that mural. In India's huge new parliament building.
Oh yeah, the $110 million building. Caused quite a reaction.
Exactly. This mural shows an ancient Indian civilization, but geographically, it includes areas that are now Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Nepal. And this takes us right to the concept of Akhand Bharat, which translates to undivided India. We had prominent figures like Minister Prahlad Joshi tweeting about it, saying it shows our powerful and self-reliant India.
Right. And another lawmaker, Manoj Kotak, said pretty much the same thing. Akhand Bharat in the new parliament represents our powerful and self-reliant India. It wasn't subtle.
Definitely not a very public statement.
What's really striking, though, is the difference between how India presents this and how its neighbors took it. For them, it wasn't about strength. It felt, well, incendiary, almost neo-imperialist, you could say. And this idea, Akhand Bharat, it's strongly linked to the RSS, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. That's the influential right-wing organization connected to the ruling BJP. And the RSS promotes Hindutva, the idea that India is fundamentally the home of the Hindus.
So it carries a lot of political weight domestically.
Absolutely. And the reactions from neighbors were pretty sharp. Pakistan's Foreign Office spokesperson didn't hold back, called it a manifestation of a revisionist and expansionist mindset. Said it aims to subjugate identities not just in neighboring countries, but even religious minorities within India itself.
Wow, strong
It's
words.
very. And it wasn't just Pakistan. In Nepal, the opposition leader KP Sharma Oli, a former PM, criticized it too. He basically said, for a country like India, seen as a democratic model, putting Nepali territory on its map in parliament, well, it cannot be called fair.
So the message received wasn't about ancient history, but about modern claims.
Exactly. It wasn't seen as just art. It felt like a political statement about territory today, which understandably sets off alarms.
That distinction is key. Which brings us to the other concept, Greater India. Now, this isn't quite the same thing, is it? It's more historical.
Right. Greater India is different. It's not really a modern political project in the same way. Historically, it refers to the spread, the diffusion of Indian cultural influence across Asia, especially Southeast Asia. Think languages like Pali and Sanskrit, Indian scripts, religions like Buddhism, Hinduism, Brahmanism spreading through trade and interaction.
So less about borders, more about cultural footprint.
Precisely. This influence spread along trade routes, places like Burma, Siam, the Malay Peninsula, Sumatra, Java, Cambodia, Champa. You see today in the amazing architecture, like the Prambanan Temple in Java, Borobudur, the world's largest Buddhist monument, also in Java, or Angkor Wat in Cambodia. Early kingdoms in Southeast Asia, like Funan and Champa, adopted many elements of Indian civilization. So yes, it's about a historical cultural sphere built over centuries through peaceful exchange, really. It's a very different feel from Akhand Bharat, which neighbors interpret as a potential threat to their current sovereignty. One's a shared past, the other feels like a possible imperial future.
And that perceived threat seems to be having real-world effects now. The Foreign Affairs article argues that this Akhand Bharat narrative, especially when you combine it with the rise of Hindu nationalism inside India, is definitely making neighbors nervous.
It is. The article suggests this internal shift could actually worsen communal tensions within India. and also create more problems with its neighbors, which in turn might force India to spend more security resources internally, potentially limiting its ability to project power abroad. Kind of a self-defeating loop for its bigger ambitions.
Let's look at Bangladesh as a case study. Relations seem to have taken a nosedive, particularly after that uprising in July 2024 that ousted Sheikh Hasina's government, which was seen as very pro-India.
Yeah, things got tense quickly.
There was an Atlantic Council piece talking about a growing India out movement there, a lot of anti-India feeling bubbling up. And specific issues too, border clashes, accusations about India releasing water and causing floods.
And India, on the other side, voicing concerns about attacks on minorities in Bangladesh. It's become quite fraught.
And then there's the whole issue with Sheikh Hasina herself. India gave her asylum after she fled.
Right, which really rankles a lot of people in Bangladesh who view her government pretty negatively. The new interim government, led by Mohammed Yunus, actually demanded her extradition. They want to charge her over alleged mass killings and disappearances.
And India refused.
Flat out refused. And then, to add fuel to the fire, the Indian Army chief made a public statement saying relations wouldn't normalize until Bangladesh installed an elected government, a clear dig at Yunus's unelected interim setup. That didn't go down well in Dhaka.
Okay, so relations are strained. Now, overlay China onto this picture. The Atlantic Council mentioned China pledging, $40 billion since 2014 through its Belt and Road Initiative.
A huge number, though. Only about $7 billion has actually shown up so far. And some big projects like the Padma Bridge and Para Power Plant, while they're running now, did face delays and cost overruns.
Right. And the interest rate on Chinese loans, often around 3%, is higher than some other lenders, though there's talk Beijing might lower it.
That 3% is a common point, yeah. But China's presence is undeniable. We're talking 21 bridges, 27 power projects implemented with Chinese help. Chinese firms have landed contracts worth nearly $23 billion. This is clearly part of China's broader geo-economic strategy, using money and infrastructure to build influence. And they're often seen as more flexible, maybe less bureaucratic, than traditional institutions like the World Bank. They tailor terms, focus on getting infrastructure built, which is attractive to many countries. That flexibility buys a lot of goodwill and leverage.
It definitely seems to be working in terms of presence. Okay, let's shift focus slightly to Nepal. Historically, India's influence there was immense, almost like a protectorate sometimes.
Yeah, often described as a vassal state, though maybe that's too strong. But the influence was huge.
But that seems to be changing too. We even saw Bhutan's foreign minister meeting top Chinese officials in 2023, talking about border disputes and maybe formal ties. That signals a wider shift, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And in Nepal itself, Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli, who's often described as quite ideologically committed to communism, has made a very deliberate pivot towards China. Think about this. Unlike pretty much all his predecessors, Oli's first foreign trip after taking office last July wasn't to Delhi, it was to Beijing, to meet Xi Jinping. Then he went to India. That's a big symbolic break.
A very clear signal.
Definitely. And he's also restarted joint military drills with China and pushed ahead with major Belt and Road projects, including that big cross-border railway plan to Kathmandu. So the question becomes, how much does this really weaken India's traditional hold? Is it a fundamental shift?
That's the million-dollar question. A source, the MPRI Impact and Policy Research Institute, specifically mentions this concern for India. It points out Oli's China first visit as a key indicator.
Right.
And it's not just gestures. China's signed agreements on trade, economic aid, technical assistance, even sending Chinese language teachers. And Nepal keeps reaffirming its support for the One China principle.
All of which highlights this wider trend we're seeing across South Asia. Since around 2005, China has just consistently outpaced India in trade and investment across the board. Look at Bangladesh again. China exports roughly twice as much there as India does. In Pakistan, the gap is even wider and has been for longer. This economic footprint translates directly into political influence, challenging India's long-held position.
Okay, so the regional picture is complex. Neighbors are nervous or pivoting. China's influence is growing. Where does the U.S. fit in all this? What's Washington's angle? Or maybe how does India see the U.S. role?
Well, the foreign affairs piece is pretty direct about this. It says India does not want a world where the U.S. is the unchallenged single superpower forever.
Okay.
India wants a multipolar system, a world with several great powers, including itself, obviously. So yes, it wants to balance China, but it also wants to act as a check on any country aiming for sole dominance, and that includes the United States.
So it's not about choosing sides between the U.S. and China.
Not in a simple way. India fiercely protects its strategic autonomy. That means avoiding formal alliances, keeping lines open to countries the West considers adversaries, like Iran and Russia, even while getting closer to the U.S. New Delhi sees this balancing act as the way to encourage that multipolar world. But the article questions if it's really working. Is India growing fast enough, strong enough, to truly balance China, let alone the U.S.? Probably not on its own. It suggests India will likely remain a major power, but not quite a superpower in the same league as the U.S. or China by mid-century.
Which means it will still need partners, even if it doesn't want formal alliances.
Exactly. But here's the rub, according to the article. Despite needing partners, India is unlikely to actually agree to a formal alliance with the U.S. There's a deep-seated historical reason the colonial past makes any perceived subordination really difficult to accept for a rising power.
A fear of losing freedom of action.
Precisely. Indian policymakers worry alliances mean getting dragged into others' conflicts, limiting their own choices, their ability to navigate between different power blocks.
So India expects support, but without the strings attached.
That seems to be the view from Delhi. It's based on realism, assuming everyone acts in their self-interest. India expects the U.S., for example, to support it against China out of U.S. self-interest, without demanding too many compromises from India in return. Of course, from the U.S. perspective, especially military planners, the closer ties with India are seen mainly as a way to counterbalance China, particularly in the Indian Ocean. Experts like Dean Cheng at Heritage have argued strongly for continuing this partnership for precisely that reason. Different motivations, perhaps.
But India has taken steps towards cooperation, things like the Quad with the U.S., Japan, Australia, and that ITU2 group with Israel, the UAE, and the U.S.
Yes, those initiatives definitely boost India's standing and do align with U.S. interests in countering China, at least implicitly.
And those foundational military agreements, Jusomia, LSA, Sismoa, BK, those allow for significant military interoperability and information sharing with the U.S.
They're very significant, no doubt. They show real progress in the defense relationship. But the Foreign Affairs article still sounds a note of caution. It argues that despite all this, India's push for multipolarity hasn't really changed the global structure. The world might still end up being more bipolar, with the U.S. and China way ahead of everyone else. And that could put India in an awkward spot.
How so?
Well, it might continue to frustrate Washington by staying active in groups like BRICS, or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where China often has more clout. The article warns that a future U.S. administration, maybe one less patient, it mentions Trump specifically, might penalize India for this kind of behavior. For instance, if India tried using local currencies for trade to avoid U.S. sanctions, it's a potentially fragile relationship.
That leads to a really striking point the article makes near the end. It contrasts India today with India during the Cold War.
Yeah, that was powerful.
It says, unlike the India of the Cold War, which remained robustly liberal even when underperforming economically, India today, despite being more economically successful, has been markedly tainted by illiberalism and authoritarianism. This internal shift towards Hindutva, the article argues, isn't just a domestic matter. It could actually undermine India's rise by creating more tension at home and worsening problems with neighbors. The erosion of secularism, the rise of authoritarian tendencies, that becomes an internal drag on its external ambitions.
Wow. Okay, what a fascinating, complex picture we've unpacked here. We've really seen how India's great power goals are tangled up with these historical ideas like Greater India and these very current political concepts like Akhand Bharat, which are clearly unsettling its neighbors.
It's definitely a delicate dance, isn't it? You've got China significantly increasing its economic footprint with the Belt and Road, offering a real alternative to India's traditional influence. And then you layer on India's insistence on strategic autonomy and these major internal political changes. It's a very fluid situation. It really underscores that South Asia isn't just India's sphere of influence anymore, if it ever solely was. It's clearly become a key arena for wider geopolitical competition. The balance is constantly shifting, and how India manages these relationships with its neighbors, with China, with the U.S., is going to be crucial for the future of the whole Indo-Pacific.